Hey guys, SimCoder here, and today we're going to make our last video on the YouTube series. This video will be on subscribing and unsubscribing from users and displaying a subscriptions page so that the users can see all of the videos of those that user is subscribed to. So this will be kind of tricky. We'll do some queries that are more complicated than we've done thus far, but yeah, it should be a really cool video, so let's jump right into it. Okay, so coming into the terminal, I'm going to quickly open up Visual Studio Code. There we go. Now we have our project opened, and I'm going to start running our Docker. So I'm going to do a reverse search for sudo docker compose up build, run it, and leave it at that. It should take some time to deploy. And the first thing that we are going to do is take care of the front end. The front end for the subscription button will take care of the videos of the people that we are subscribed to in the last part of the video. But for now, we are going to just create a button and an HTTP request for that button's click. Okay, so coming into user profile, because remember, this is where the profile of each user is, we'll have a button. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to do is to come up top in the class container and add a button. So button, close that up, subscribe. And then we'll have an on-click, which will take us to a function which we'll create right now. So that function, and I'm going to place it below the component it mounts, that function will be called handle subscribe. And we won't take care of any logic in the front end, it will all be taken care of in the back end. We'll have to bind this function, and to do that we simply say this.handle subscribe, and let's make it a tiny bit bigger, equals to this.handle subscribe.binds this. Okay, and there we go, we have our function binded. Okay, so now coming into the function itself, we'll just say let that equal to this, because we'll make an HTTP request and we'll have to access this variable inside of it, and because we lose it when we enter the callbacks, then we have to save it somewhere else. Okay, and now we'll need to create a token for the current logged in user, and for that we'll have to import Firebase, obviously. So Firebase from, let me just check, it is Firebase, yeah, Firebase. And now coming below, in order to create a token, and this is something that we've done extensively in these lessons, so let's simply say what we've always done, which is firebase.auth, open parenthesis, .current user, .get ID token, set to true to force it to refresh, then ID token, open arrow function, this will retrieve to us the ID token of the user, a new ID token, and in here we'll make the Axios call. For this we need again to import Axios, so go up top and simply import Axios from Axios. Okay, so let's build our HTTP request. We know that it will be a post request because we'll make changes to the database with this request. And we want to call it something like API/user/subscribe. So that's exactly what we'll do. So axios.post, and now we'll add the link for our web page, which is 127.0.0.1, or localhost, wherever suits you. 6200 is the port that the server is on. And then we say API/user/subscribe. Then we say comma null, and we pass along the parameters that we want. We must place the comma null because it will, this variable in this field, I believe it is for a data form, but because we don't have any, we have to set it to something, which is in this case will be null. Okay, so, and the parameters that we must pass along are the user, of the currently logged in user, the ID token, and the ID of the user that we want to subscribe to. So, in order to do this, pretty straightforward, all we are going to do, and I'm going to give it an enter here in order for you guys to be able to see it clearer. Indent that, okay. It will be the firebase.auth current user, because remember, we must pass along the user object in order to validate the user with the ID token. Then we pass along the ID token. And finally, we pass along the ID of the currently logged in user. And this is given by this line right here, which is this.props.match.params.id. And this will give us the ID that's in the URL, which, as you may remember, comes from this ID right here that we have in our routes. Okay, indent this, and there we go. This will be our full request. Obviously, we'll have a then callback, so then results. Open that up, and I'm just going to console log the result. I'm not going to do anything with it at the moment. And we'll have a catch. In this case, would be an error. Remember, for production, it is not good to have console logs laying around. They might disclose information that you don't want to show the user, but for development purposes, it is more than fine to leave them here. Okay, so now we have everything done in the front end. All that's left is to make the onClick. So in this case, you'll go into button and say onClick equals to this dot handle, and I meant to do curly brackets. So this dot handle subscribe. And now this should make a request. So I'm going to jump into the browser and test it out. Okay, so I'm in a page of a user and I'm going to try and subscribe, but before that I'm going to open up the console and I'm going to subscribe, and as you can see, it tries to make the request for this endpoint, but it fails with the error 404 because the endpoint doesn't exist. Okay, so I just made an error in here, I believe. Yep, I placed 2 Bs. But apart from that, it should be working and it should be ready to, when we have the endpoint, to work completely. So I'm going to grab the endpoint, which is API user subscribe. I'm going to close up the profile and I'm going to jump into the backend. So coming in here, I'm going to go into routes and I'm going to place the endpoint wherever I see fit, which is with all of the other routes related to user. I'm going to place this here just to save it somewhere, and I'm going to double up on the endpoints of the user. I'm going to copy the endpoint in here, and now we have our boilerplate. Okay, so now I'm going to change the function name, and I'm going to say handle subscribe. Because I'm not going to call it subscribe, because if a user is already subscribed, then it will remove a subscription. So I believe handle subscribe fits the name of the function better. And I'm going to add all of the query params that we passed along. So the first one is user, then ID token, and then ID. I'm going to pass these variables along to the handle subscribe function, which we'll create in a second. And I'm going to jump into user.js. Okay, this is where we'll create our function. So let me just, let's do it right now. And I can say handle subscribe, open parentheses, user ID token ID, which are the params for this function, the arguments for this function. And I missed 2 points in here, okay. And I say new promise resolve reject. Just like we've always done, we have to pass along a promise, because remember, this is not an synchronous function, it is asynchronous. Okay, so the first thing that we'll do is to validate the user. So module.exports.verify accounts, and it receives the user and the ID token. And we say then results open arrow function, and there we go. Now we are ready to actually subscribe the user to other users. I'm going to also add the catch, just in case the validation goes wrong. And remember, this verify account we did in the early lessons, and it is up top in here in the user.js, and it just confirms that the user is really the user that we are trying to use at the moment by validating the ID token and correlating it with the user object that we pass along. Okay, so first things first, I'm not going to handle this function yet. I'm going to go into models, because we must add the arguments or the parameters for the subscriptions and for those that are subscribed to us. So YouTube generally saves both of them, and we are going to change them accordingly. So if I subscribe to user A, then it will add to my list of subscriptions the user A, and in the user A, I will be added to the subscribers. So that's easy enough. It's basically the same thing, but it is an extra step that we must take. So I'm going to add subscriptions, 2 points, and this will be an array, because obviously you can have more than one. Then we open up curly brackets, because this will contain IDs of the user. So in this case, it will be mongoose.schema.types.object ID, comma ref. Then we simply pass along user, which is this schema itself. Then we double that up and say subscribers. That's it, easy enough. Now we have a place for our subscriptions and for our subscribers, so we can be free to start coding. Okay, so now that we have our model, we are able to continue writing our handle subscribe function. So coming in here, the first thing that we are going to do is to try to find the user, if the user is subscribed to this ID or not. And we can do this by doing user.find1, open parentheses, open curly brackets, underscore ID, 2 points results.id. We are using the user that's returned from the verify account, and we are trying to find the user that has that corresponding ID. Easy enough. Now moving on, we want to know if in the subscriptions model, which is right here, there is a user, there is an ID that corresponds to this ID. And we can make a query for that. That's actually pretty simple. We just have to do $ in 2 points, square brackets, and say ID. This will return a user if and only if the ID corresponds to the result.id, and if there is an ID inside the subscriptions array of the ID of the user that we try to find in the first part of the query. So easy enough. Even though the English might seem complicated, it isn't doing all that much. Then we simply do comma, function, error, and user. Let's open up curly brackets. There we go. Do like this, okay? Now we say if user equals to null, then that means that there isn't a single user that has these parameters, which means that the user is not currently subscribed to the user that has this ID. Because the first part will always be true because we already verified the account, so it is only dependent on this second part of the query. So if we do if user equals null, then that means that we must subscribe the user to this ID. Okay, and in order to subscribe, what we have to do is to do update one, open curly brackets, ID, 2 points, results ID, because we want to change the object of this user, obviously. And then we make a push of this ID into the array, into the subscriptions array. So in order to do this, open quotes, $, push, 2 points, and now we want to add it to the subscriptions. So add subscriptions ID. ID is the user that we want to subscribe to at the moment. And then we must pass along an option, which should be inside curly brackets. So the option is called use, find, and modify. And we must set this to true, otherwise a deprecated error will appear. Then simply say then, we must write our callbacks, open arrow function, and open that up. And we're done. Now we must not only update the subscriptions array of the user that's currently logged in, we must also update the subscribers array of the user that we want to subscribe to. So it is exactly the same. All you have to do is to change subscriptions for subscribe, change this ID for results dot underscore ID, and change the ID of the user for ID because that's the one that's passed along in the arguments. Okay, we are pushing, everything is correct, then we can simply resolve in order for the function to finish and to for the promise to be ended. Okay, so now that this is done, we have to do the else. In case the user exists, then that means that that user is actually subscribed to this ID already. Then we must obviously remove that user from each array so that it is no longer subscribed to. And to do that, all you have to do is change push for pull, and this will remove the ID from the subscriptions and the result dot underscore ID from the subscribers. That's it. Now I'm going to give it a quick spin, check if everything is working as it should, and I'll get back to you in a second.
Eventually.
Okay, so now I have both the profile page of the test@gmail.com. I'm logged in with the other account, test2@gmail.com, and I'm going to try and see the changes within Postman whenever I make a request. So let's send subscribe. And I forgot to place in an ID. So if I place in ID, then you'll see that in the test@gmail.com, a new user is added to the subscribers. And in the other user, it is added, the test@gmail.com is added to subscription. So it is working as it should be. And if I send another subscribe, then it should be cleared, and the subscribers and the subscriptions should be both cleared. So it is working as it should be. Now we are going to move on into the final part of the lesson. Okay, so in order to display videos, the first thing that we are going to do is to take care of the front end as we always do. Okay, so coming in here, I'm going to create a new component which will be called subscriptions. That's correct. And I'm going to actually come into home and just copy all of this. This is because the page will be the same, just the link is different, and the location will be different. So in this case, it will be subscriptions. And there is a easier way of doing this. We could just use one component for this part, but I'm going to leave it like this as it makes it easier to read the code. This is your subscriptions, will be the text that appears up top. Okay, so now it is all ready for the final parts. I'm going to change the class name for subscriptions, make the first letter capitalized, save that, change the export default, and we are done. Now going into app.js, I'm going to add the subscriptions page, obviously. It is needed. So subscriptions, add the component as well, which we'll be importing in a second. So coming up top, it is going to be in the root directory of the components folder. Add subscriptions. And now if you go below, it should be green, meaning it is a class. And everything should be up and running right now. However, we must change how the video list behaves, because right now we aren't fetching anything that's related to subscription, so we must take care of that right now. Coming in here, I'm going to double up on the last case, going to subscriptions, see what I called the location, which was subscriptions, and place it in here. Okay, so now all you have to do is to pass along all of the data of the current logged in user and get all of the videos accordingly. So in order to do this, I'm going to pass along the ID of the user, which in this case will be firebase.auth.current-user.uid. And I'm not going to add in any verification, token validation. I don't think it is necessary, and I'm not even sure if YouTube themselves do it. So then for the videos, it will be user, instead of user, it will be subscriptions. Okay? And that's it. Now I don't believe anything else is to be done. The last thing that okay, there's an error. We have to import Firebase. But the last thing that I'm going to do is just to add a link to the navbar for the user to quickly be able to jump into the subscriptions page. And coming in here, I'm going to double up on the last link. I'm going to go into app, see exactly how I named it, which is this. I'm going to add the path name for the subscriptions. Saving that. And now if I jump into subscription, this is your subscriptions, or these are your subscriptions would be the correct English. These are your subscriptions. I'm going to put quote videos to make it more correct. And right now no videos appear because we don't have our endpoint, so a 404 error is appearing. So in order to fix this, I'm going to create the endpoint and make the query for that. I'm going to close everything. I'm going to open a video list just to get the endpoint. Grab this. Go into the backend, routes, go into the video parts. We have the video list here, the video user. Drop that inside here and double up on a route, just so that we can get the boilerplates. And then instead of get by user, I'm going to say get by subscriptions. Subscriptions. And we pass along the ID, because remember that's the ID of the current logged in user. So that's where we are, that's how we are going to find the subscriptions of the user, and then all of the videos that contain the subscriptions that the user has. So jumping into the video function, I'm going to go into the get by ID, no, get by user. And I'm going to double up on this function. It is pretty similar what we are going to do, so we can simply do that. I'm going to grab the name just so that we are sure no errors, no errors while typing are made, and say get by subscriptions. Okay, so now what we have to do is to, first of all, find all of the users that this user is subscribed to. And in order to do this, we can simply say find one, better yet. And I'm doing find one because in here, when we go into video list, I'm getting the ID, which is the Firebase ID and not the ID of Mongo. So instead of doing find by ID, which we can't do because find by ID only works with the underscore ID, which is the ID generated by Mongo, we have to do find one. So find one, Firebase ID, 2 points, ID. Okay, and we say this should be in curly brackets. So add that, say then results arrow function, and open that up. Place the video inside of here. But now, instead of creator being ID, we want creator to be results dot subscriptions. This will be an array, obviously, but it will find every video that contains any of the IDs that are inside this array. So it should be working just fine. Okay, so I'm going to give it a quick spin and see if everything checks out. Okay, so here we are, everything is working as it should. I created another account which is called test3@gmail.com, and if I go into the test@gmail.com, or better yet, if I go into subscriptions and reload, then you'll see that no videos appear. However, if I subscribe to the test@gmail.com and give it a second and jumping back into the subscriptions, then the test@gmail.com videos will appear. If I go into test2@gmail.com and I subscribe, then test and the test2 will appear. And if I unsubscribe from test2, for example, then the test2 videos will disappear. So yeah, we are done. Everything is working as it should be. Obviously, this is a simplified version of YouTube. I don't believe I have to say that, but it shows you the basics on how to accomplish everything and how to do the most important parts, which is uploading videos, displaying videos, subscriptions, displaying lists of videos and things like that. So obviously, this is a really slimmed down version of it. I'm going to start working on the redesign of this project, so make sure to subscribe because I will release a video whenever the redesign is done, and it will be available for you to use and to enjoy. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. This series was really amazing. I learned a lot doing it, and I hope that you did too. So I hope to see you again tomorrow, and ciao.